Sign this now, or I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." The words hung between us as my boss, Finley Burke, slid the resignation letter across the glass conference table. His knuckles whitened against the document's edge, fingers spreading like pale spiders. The conference room felt impossibly small, the walls drawing inward with each shallow breath I took. "I need this today, Sarah." His voice dropped to a whisper, so the employees passing by couldn't hear. "Your performance hasn't met expectations. We both know this is for the best." 3 years of doubling department metrics flashed through my mind. The late nights, the canceled weekends, the ideas he'd claimed as his own in executive meetings. And now, after I'd questioned those unusual transactions in last quarter's reports, this ambush. I lifted the pen, my vision tunneling to a pinpoint. The resignation letter blurred before me, but one phrase remained crystal clear: voluntary resignation. I glanced up at Finley's triumphant expression, at the security guard lingering just outside the door, and made my decision. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment. For weeks, I documented every irregular request, every questionable directive, every veiled threat. I'd studied employment law until dawn broke through my apartment blinds. I signed without protest, but when Finley stepped away to answer a call, I made one subtle alteration to the standard text. His mistake, underestimating the power of a single word. Before I continue this story, I need you to understand something important. Knowledge is the weapon that never jams. If you've ever felt powerless against someone who seemed untouchable, stay with me, because what I'm about to share isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power in a world designed to make you surrender it. My name is Sarah Menon, and until 3 months ago, I was the lead financial analyst at Beckworth Industries. I'm 34, unmarried, with a master's degree in business analytics and a certification in forensic accounting that I'd earned through night classes. Most people describe me as meticulous. Some say obsessive about details. I color code my calendar, alphabetize my spice rack, and can spot a numerical discrepancy, like most people notice a flash of lightning. My parents immigrated from India before I was born, settling in a small Midwestern town where my father opened an electronics repair shop. "Always check the smallest components first," he'd say, hunched over circuit boards. The tiniest connection often causes the biggest failures. This became my life philosophy. Pay attention to details others overlook. When I joined Beckworth 4 years ago, the company was expanding rapidly, opening new offices across the country. The CEO, Aubrey Beckworth, had a reputation for innovation and inclusivity. The company's slogan, "Building Better Futures Together," adorned every wall, email signature, and coffee mug. I believed in it, perhaps naively. Finley Burke became my direct supervisor 2 years into my tenure. He transferred from the West Coast office with glowing recommendations and an impressive resume. Tall, with prematurely silver hair and a voice that commanded attention, Finley moved through the office like he owned it. The executive team adored him. The board praised his fresh perspectives. The problems began subtly. First, my name disappeared from project proposal credits. Then came the exclusion from meetings I'd previously attended. My reports required multiple revisions for clarity, while male colleagues with similar findings received immediate approval. "You're being paranoid," my colleague Theo whispered when I mentioned the pattern. "Finley's just demanding. He's like that with everyone." But he wasn't. I started keeping notes, dates, times, witnesses, exact phrases. When Finley praised Vincent for the quarterly projection model I'd created. When he interrupted my presentations but gave others unbroken attention. When he scheduled team lunches during my standing therapy appointment, despite my calendar clearly showing the conflict. Still, I excelled. Our department's efficiency increased by 22% under my systematic approach to workflow management. I created a predictive analysis tool that saved the company millions in procurement costs. I stayed visible, valuable, and vigilant. Then came the financial discrepancies. It started with an anomaly in the third quarter reports, transfers between departmental budgets that lacked proper authorization codes. Small amounts, easily overlooked, but following a pattern. I cross-referenced past quarters and found similar irregularities dating back to Finley's arrival. These transactions need explanation, I said during our one-on-one meeting, sliding the highlighted printouts across his desk. The authorization chain is incomplete. Finley barely glanced at the papers. Accounting approved these. You're overstepping, Syra. But accounting requires director-level signatures for interdepartmental transfers. These don't have them. His expression shifted then, something cold replacing his usual dismissive smile. Drop it. This isn't your concern. I didn't drop it. Instead, I created a secure folder on my personal drive and continued gathering evidence. The pattern expanded. Budget reallocations coinciding with performance bonuses, vendor contracts with inflated pricing to subsidiaries with obscured ownership structures, expense reports with consistent anomalies. The hostility escalated in precise increments. My performance review, previously exceeding expectations, suddenly cited communication issues and failure to align with team objectives. My project assignments shifted to administrative tasks. My emails to other department heads went unanswered. He's building a case against you, warned Varian from legal during an after-work drink. Be careful. Document everything. I was already documenting everything. But now I added evening research sessions on employment law, corporate whistleblower protections, and constructive dismissal precedents. I installed a recording app on my phone. I forwarded key emails to my personal account. I took photographs of documents that mysteriously disappeared from shared drives. The final escalation came after the executive quarterly review. Aubrey Beckworth had praised my procurement analysis, asking me to present at the next board meeting. Excellent work, Syra, she said, squeezing my shoulder. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Finley's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes tracked me like a predator throughout the remainder of the meeting. That afternoon, my access to several critical databases was revoked for security protocol updates. The next day, an email announced that Vincent would handle the board presentation due to his familiarity with the broader context. When I questioned this decision, Finley called me into his office. Your attitude has become problematic, he said, his voice carefully modulated as he closed the door. Several colleagues have expressed concerns about your collaborative abilities. Which colleagues? I asked. I'd like to address their concerns directly. That's not appropriate. This is a pattern, Syra. First, the unfounded accusations about financial irregularities. Now, this insubordination. Asking for clarification isn't insubordination. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let me be clear. Your position here is becoming tenuous. I recommend focusing on improving your performance rather than questioning management decisions. That night, I met with an employment attorney. Eleanor Pham listened carefully to my account, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. This is textbook hostile work environment, she said, adjusting her rectangular glasses. The pattern is clear and your documentation is excellent. But here's the reality. These cases are exhausting, expensive, and often career-damaging, even when you win. So, I should just quit. No. She tapped my folder of evidence. If they want you gone, make them pay for it. Constructive dismissal settlements can be substantial with evidence like yours. But be prepared. They'll likely try to force a resignation first. She was right. 3 days later, Finley began CCing HR on trivial issues with my work. A week after that, I received my first formal warning for missing deadlines on assignments given with impossible time frames. The next week, my workspace was relocated to an isolated corner near the server room, where the constant hum of equipment made phone conversations nearly impossible. Through it all, I maintained meticulous records. I responded to every accusation with documented facts. I remained unfailingly professional in every interaction, and I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. It came sooner than expected. On a Wednesday morning, my calendar updated with a mandatory meeting in Conference Room B. No agenda, no other attendees, just Finley. As I walked toward the conference room, Veronique passed me in the hallway, her expression tense. "He's been in with HR all morning," she murmured without breaking stride. I nodded, my emergency plan crystallizing. In my bag was a folder containing copies of all my evidence, organized chronologically. My phone was recording, and I'd studied the standard resignation template used by Beckworth Industries, including all its legal implications. Which brings us back to that glass conference table, the resignation letter, and Finley's ultimatum. When he stepped away to answer a call, I didn't hesitate. With a steady hand, I crossed out voluntary resignation and wrote above it, "Constructive dismissal due to hostile work environment." I added the date and time in the margin, my writing neat and clear. Finley returned, snatched the paper without reading it, and smiled with the satisfaction of a man who believes he's won. "Clear your workspace by end of day. Security will escort you out." "I understand," I said, maintaining eye contact. "I'll need this documented for my records." His smile faltered briefly. "HR will provide the necessary paperwork." I nodded and stood to leave. As I reached the door, I turned back. "Just to confirm, this meeting was at your request, correct? To discuss my employment status." "Yes," he said impatiently, "as documented in the letter you just signed." "Thank you for clarifying." I closed the door behind me, heart pounding but mind clear. In the bathroom, I took deep breaths until my hands stopped trembling. Then I called Eleanor Pham. "It happened," I said. "Exactly as you predicted. Did you make the amendment?"
Yes.
He didn't notice. "Good. Send me everything now. I'll have the formal complaint ready within the hour." By 3 o'clock, I had packed my personal items into a small box. As promised, a security guard named Luis waited nearby, looking uncomfortable with his assignment. "I'm sorry about this, Miss Menon," he said quietly. "Never made sense to me why they'd let go of someone like you." "Thank you, Luis. I appreciate that." Before leaving, I made 2 final stops. First, to the Human Resources Department, where I handed Director Imani Wilson a sealed envelope. "This is a formal complaint of constructive dismissal and hostile work environment," I said, my voice steady. "It includes the altered resignation letter that Mr. Burke provided today, which I amended before signing to accurately reflect the situation. I've also included documentation of the ongoing issues that led to this point." Imani's expression remained neutral, but her eyes widened slightly. "I'll review this immediately. My attorney will be in contact tomorrow morning. She has copies of everything in that envelope." My second stop was to Theo's desk. He looked up, startled by my approach, with the security guard waiting several feet away. "You're leaving?" he asked, rising halfway from his chair. "Not by choice," I replied. "But before I go, check the share drive. Q_finance_quarterly_historical. Focus on the transfer patterns and folders marked with Finley's initials. Compare them with the executive bonus schedule." His brow furrowed. "Sarah, what are you saying?" "Just look. And be careful who you discuss it with." I squeezed his shoulder and walked away. Luis escorted me to the lobby, carrying my box despite my protests. At the main entrance, he paused. You know, Miss Menon, I've worked security here for 12 years. Seen a lot of people come and go. The ones who leave quietly when they've done nothing wrong, they never come back. But the ones who stand their ground. He smiled slightly. They often do. If you've ever faced injustice that seemed too powerful to fight, if you've ever swallowed your words because speaking up felt too dangerous, stay with me because what happened next changed not just my career, but my understanding of power itself. Before I continue, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. Hit that notification bell, because the conclusion to this story reveals exactly how knowledge, preparation, and courage can transform a moment of powerlessness into justice that ripples beyond anything you could imagine. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights while replaying the day's events. The air felt different somehow, lighter, despite the uncertainty ahead. For the first time in months, I breathed fully, without the tightness in my chest that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing it. My phone buzzed at 7:13 the next morning. Unknown number. Syra Menon speaking. Ms. Menon. This is Imani Wilson from Human Resources. Her voice sounded strained. We've reviewed your documentation and need you to come in this morning for a meeting with senior leadership. Am I to understand I'm still employed at Beckworth then? A pause. Your employment status is complicated at present. The document you submitted creates a legal situation we need to address immediately. I'll be there at 9 with my attorney. That won't be. I'll be there at 9 with my attorney. I repeated, my voice quiet but firm, or we can proceed directly to formal litigation. Another pause. 9 o'clock. 14th floor conference room. I texted Eleanor immediately, and she agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the office at 8:30. When I arrived, she was already there, immaculate in a charcoal suit, spreading documents across a corner table. They're panicking, she said without preamble. I received 3 calls from their legal department last night, each more conciliatory than the last. Your documentation is exceptional. What should I expect? They'll try to minimize the situation. They'll offer settlements with confidentiality clauses. They'll attempt to isolate Finley's behavior from company liability. She shuffled the papers into a precise stack. Our position is simple. The company enabled a hostile work environment through negligent oversight. We have evidence of both the hostility and the financial improprieties you identified. And if they refuse to acknowledge it, Eleanor's smile was thin and precise. Then we proceed with formal charges that will trigger external audits and public disclosure requirements. Their choice. At 8:57, we walked through Beckworth's main entrance. Luis was at the security desk, his eyebrows rising in surprise as I approached. Ms. Menon. He smiled slightly. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Circumstances change, I replied, signing the visitor log. That they do. He handed me a temporary badge. 14th floor is pretty busy this morning. Lots of unexpected meetings. In the elevator, Eleanor reviewed our strategy one final time. Let them speak first. We need to understand their position before showing our full hand. The 14th floor reception area hummed with unusual activity. Assistants rushed between offices, arms full of files. Through glass walls, I glimpsed executives in intense discussions. Near the main conference room, Theo stood talking with Vinique, both looking pale and serious. When Theo spotted me, his eyes widened, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. Imani Wilson emerged from the conference room, her usual composure slightly fractured. Ms. Menon, thank you for coming. And you must be Eleanor Pham, legal counsel for Ms. Menon. Eleanor extended her hand. Shall we begin? Inside the conference room sat Aubrey Beckworth herself, flanked by the company's general counsel and chief operating officer. Conspicuously absent was Finley. "Ms. Menon," Aubrey began, her normally warm voice formal, "we've reviewed your complaint and supporting documentation. The allegations are serious and concerning." "They're not allegations," I corrected quietly. "They're documented facts." The general counsel, a man named Pascal, whose last name I'd never caught, cleared his throat. "Before we continue, we want to emphasize that Beckworth Industries takes workplace conduct extremely seriously. If there have been violations of our policies, we want to address them appropriately." "If," Eleanor echoed, her tone making the single syllable sound dangerous. Aubrey raised a hand slightly. "We're not disputing Ms. Menon's experiences. We're trying to understand the full scope of the situation." "The scope extends beyond my client," Eleanor said. "Based on our preliminary investigation, multiple employees have experienced similar treatment under Mr. Burke's supervision." A flash of genuine surprise crossed Aubrey's face. "You've spoken with other employees?" "No," I interjected. "But they've begun speaking with your HR department as of yesterday afternoon. I believe 3 women from different departments have already come forward." Imani nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming my statement. "We're also concerned about the financial irregularities Ms. Menon identified," Eleanor continued. "Those require immediate investigation by independent auditors." Pascal shifted uncomfortably. "We have internal audit procedures, which failed to catch these discrepancies for 2 years," I finished. "That suggests either negligence or complicity in your financial oversight systems." The room fell silent. Aubrey studied me with new intensity, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "What exactly are you seeking, Miss Menon?" she finally asked. Eleanor opened her portfolio. "Full reinstatement with back pay from the date of the constructive dismissal. A comprehensive independent investigation into both the hostile work environment and financial irregularities. Accountability for all parties involved in either creating or enabling these conditions, and structural changes to prevent similar situations in the future." "And if we counter with a settlement offer?" Pascal asked. "Then we proceed with formal charges that will necessitate public disclosure," Eleanor replied evenly. "My client isn't interested in being silenced with money." Aubrey leaned forward. "And Mr. Burke, what do you expect regarding his position?" I met her gaze directly. "That's for you to determine after a proper investigation. But I will not work under his supervision again." The meeting continued for another hour, cycling through legalities, processes, and next steps. By its conclusion, I had been formally reinstated with temporary reassignment to the executive analysis team, reporting directly to the COO. An independent investigative firm would arrive the following day, and Finley had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. As we prepared to leave, Aubrey asked Eleanor for a moment alone with me. After a glance to confirm I was comfortable with this, Eleanor stepped outside. "I owe you an apology," Aubrey said once we were alone. "I pride myself on building an ethical company where everyone can thrive. I failed to see what was happening in your department. Hierarchies can create blind spots," I replied, "even for the most well-intentioned leaders." She nodded slowly. "The financial discrepancies you identified, how extensive do you believe they are?" "Significant enough to affect quarterly reports. Systematic enough to suggest intentional manipulation. And patterned in ways that correlate with executive bonus structures." Something hardened in her expression. "I see. That changes the nature of this situation considerably." "Yes, it does." I stood to leave. "One question, if I may. Was Finley informed of my reinstatement?" "He was notified of his administrative leave this morning. He doesn't yet know the full circumstances." She paused. He's expected to clear his office tomorrow morning under supervision. As I exited the conference room, Theo was waiting near the elevators. "You magnificent, terrifying woman," he whispered as I approached. "The entire finance department is in upheaval. They've locked down all the servers Finley had access to. Did you look at those folders?" He nodded. "I did. And I made copies before reporting it. The patterns were impossible to miss once you knew where to look." He hesitated. "I should have listened when you first raised concerns. I'm sorry. What matters is that you looked eventually. Truth requires witnesses to have power." The next week unfolded with dizzying speed. The independent investigators established a temporary office on the 12th floor, interviewing dozens of employees. I spent hours walking them through my documentation, explaining the patterns I'd identified in both workplace behavior and financial records. By Friday, the count of employees who had reported inappropriate behavior from Finley had reached 11, 8 women and 3 men, spanning multiple departments. The financial investigation had expanded to include relationships with 3 vendor companies and unusual patterns in project allocations. I returned to my regular workspace, now relocated to a bright corner near the finance team's central hub. Colleagues who had previously avoided eye contact now stopped by with coffee and questions. Some apologized for their silence. Others shared stories of their own uncomfortable experiences. The atmosphere throughout the office had shifted, tension releasing in some places, intensifying in others as people reconsidered their own complicity in what had happened. On Wednesday of the second week, Eleanor called with an update. "The initial findings are damning," she said. "The investigators have identified what appears to be a kickback scheme involving vendor contracts. Finley was routing business to companies where he had undisclosed financial interests, then manipulating internal budgets to hide the inflated costs." "How much money are we talking about?" "Preliminary estimate is $1.2 million over 2 years, and they've only examined about half the contracts flagged in your documentation." I pressed my hand against the window of my apartment, feeling the cool glass against my palm. What happens next? The company has 2 choices: handle this internally with termination and potential civil recovery, or involve law enforcement for criminal charges. Given the scope, I suspect they'll have to do the latter. She was right. The following day, Aubrey called an all-staff meeting. Her normally perfect appearance showed subtle signs of strain: a missed button on her blazer, hair pulled back more severely than usual. "I want to address the ongoing investigation directly," she began, her voice carrying across the packed cafeteria. "What began as a workplace conduct complaint has uncovered financial improprieties that cannot be ignored or handled internally. We have filed formal reports with the appropriate authorities, who will be conducting their own investigation." A murmur rippled through the room. "I take full responsibility for the oversight failures that allowed this to happen," she continued. "We are implementing immediate changes to our financial controls, reporting structures, and management oversight. Most importantly, we are creating new channels for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation." She paused, scanning the room. "To those who experienced mistreatment and felt unable to speak up, I apologize. To those who did speak up and weren't heard, I apologize more deeply. And to the person who finally forced us to listen," her eyes found mine, "I am both sorry and grateful." The changes came rapidly after that. New financial oversight protocols, restructured reporting relationships, mandatory training on workplace conduct, and whistleblower protections. The investigation expanded, then concluded after 6 weeks with a comprehensive report that the executive team reviewed with ashen faces. Finley never returned to the building after his administrative leave began. According to Office Whispers, he had hired an aggressive defense attorney and was attempting to negotiate immunity in exchange for information about broader involvement in the financial schemes, implying that others in leadership had known or participated. 3 months after I'd amended that resignation letter, I received two unexpected communications. The first was an email from Aubrey asking me to consider a new position, Director of Financial Integrity, reporting directly to her, with oversight of compliance across all departments. The second was a text from an unknown number. "You've ruined me. Hope you're satisfied with what you've done." Finley's final attempt at intimidation, sent the day before his arraignment on multiple fraud charges. I didn't respond to his message. There was nothing to say. This hadn't been about ruining him. It had been about refusing to be ruined myself. I accepted the director position after negotiating both the salary and authority the role required. My first official act was to implement a system allowing anonymous reporting of financial concerns with mandatory review protocols. My second was to recommend promotions for both Theo and Veronique, who had provided crucial support during the investigation. The company announced the organizational changes at the annual all-staff meeting, where Aubrey publicly acknowledged the painful but necessary transformation Beckworth had undergone. Sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those willing to speak uncomfortable truths, she said, inviting me to the podium. Sarah Menon turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for institutional improvement. We're grateful she chose to fight for what's right rather than walk away. As I stepped up to speak, I saw Luis at the back of the room, giving me a small salute. I thought of my father's words about tiny components causing the biggest failures and how sometimes fixing those small connections can transform an entire system. 6 months ago, I was told to sign a resignation letter or never work in this industry again. I began. I signed, but not what was expected. That moment taught me something crucial. Power doesn't always lie with those who appear to hold it. Sometimes power lies in knowledge, in preparation, in the willingness to stand firm when others expect you to crumble. I looked out at the faces watching me. Some I knew well, others barely at all part of the system I'd helped remake. The paper I signed that day wasn't just about my job. It was about whether we accept environments where intimidation outweighs integrity, about whether we allow fear to silence truth. Each of us makes that choice daily, in ways large and small. I paused, remembering the weight of the pen in my hand that day, the clarity that had come in that moment of decision. I chose to change a single word on a document. That choice triggered a transformation none of us could have predicted. Your choices matter too, even the small ones, especially the small ones. They compound into the culture we create together. As for Finley, the legal system delivered its own form of justice. After pleading guilty to reduced charges, he received a 3-year sentence and restitution order. His professional reputation was destroyed, not through dramatic exposure, but through the systematic documentation of his own choices. Choices he'd made believing no one was watching carefully enough to catch him. The industry conferences where he'd once commanded attention now featured his case as a cautionary example of corporate ethics failures. The same precision he'd used to manipulate systems became the tool of his undoing when those systems were properly examined. The most profound victory, however, wasn't about his downfall. It was watching Beckworth transform into the company it had always claimed to be. Watching colleagues find their voices after years of silence. Witnessing the power of documented truth against systemic deception. 1 year after amending that resignation letter, I received an industry leadership award for the compliance framework I'd developed. As I accepted it, I spotted a familiar face in the audience, Eleanor Pham, now heading a specialized practice focusing on workplace justice cases. "You didn't just win a case," she told me at the reception afterward. "You changed how an entire company understands accountability. That's remarkably rare." "It wasn't just me," I replied. "It was everyone who spoke up afterward. Everyone who had been waiting for permission to tell the truth." She smiled. But someone had to go first. Someone had to show it was possible. That night, I called my father to tell him about the award. "You were right, Dad," I said. "The smallest components really do determine whether the whole system works or fails." "And the smallest changes," he replied, pride warming his voice, "can sometimes reset everything." If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll share your own experience in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment where changing one small thing, one word, one decision, one action, transformed your situation? Or perhaps you're facing such a moment now and gathering the courage to act. Remember, power often lies not with those who intimidate, but with those who refuse to be intimidated. Like this video if you believe in standing up for what's right, and subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary courage that leads to extraordinary change. Because sometimes the most important signature isn't on a resignation letter. It's on the decision to trust your own worth enough to defend it.